Hi, and welcome to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series. My name is Suzanne Parker. I'm part of the English faculty here at Brookdale, and I'm also the director of the Visiting Writers Series. We have two guests on our show today, Jeff Gordinier and Joshua Beckman, who I'm really excited to be talking with. Jeff Gordinier is the author of X Saves the World. I gotta get the subtitle. How Generation X Got the Shaft but Could Still Keep Everything from Sucking. He's also an editor-at-large at Details magazine and has written for Esquire, GQ, Spin, Fortune, Entertainment Weekly, thepoetryfoundation.org, and I'm just going to say, et cetera, et cetera.
No, keep going.
Los Angeles, we're Cookie and Crawdaddy. I want to say
teasing.
Cookie and Crawdaddy. And offsprung parenting. Anyways, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome
I'm
to the
psyched
show.
to be in New Jersey.
Yeah?
Yeah, my dad's family's from New Jersey, so I'm psyched to be. My dad grew up on the Jersey Shore.
Right around here?
Yeah, Point Pleasant Beach.
Oh, okay.
And I've got cousins in Monmouth Beach and Rumson, Little Silver, and the whole area.
And you were saying your mom actually knows the Brookdale Community College campus? She's been
Yeah,
here?
my mom grew up in Red Bank, so yeah, and I went to college in New Jersey, so.
Oh, what college?
Princeton, so
Okay.
yeah, Jersey
Oh,
people.
that one.
That
Yeah,
one.
that one. Yes.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry, but yeah. See, try to slip that in really early.
Really? Well, we're done with you now. Thank
Yeah,
you for
thanks.
being
Okay,
on the show.
thanks for having me. Good times.
So X Saves the World, which is not about superheroes. Although
Well, if people think it's about superheroes, that's fine. If they buy it, and if they think it's about pornography, that's fine. Some people think it's about religion. I mean, whatever they think it's about, that's terrific. If they pick it up, I'm psyched.
was it on your blog you were talking about the man in an interview who kept asking you Jesus questions?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Somebody kept asking me at one reading, how do you feel about the rise of Islam in the world, and that Islam seems to be getting more converts at this point. And I was like, I'm not touching that, man. No way. Why are you asking me that? I mean, I'm not. You have to be polite, of course, but
Yeah.
I'm really confused as to why he's asking me this question when I wrote a book about Generation X and pop culture, and it turns out I think that he thought X Saves the World was a book about Jesus.
Yeah.
Because of the title, like X and Christmas. That's my only conclusion.
You would think when you read from the book, he would have maybe self-corrected on that?
This was after the reading, but you know what's weird is I had read about Nirvana. So maybe that even confirmed
Just
that it's a book
completely
about religion.
confused.
Yeah, like maybe he thought that was the Buddhism section. And perhaps he's right.
Did he at least buy the book?
He did buy the book, and I signed it for him. I was psyched he was there. I welcome all fans, even those who think it's about something else.
Well, it's not about Jesus, and
Not really.
directly, no.
No.
And it's not about men in tights.
Well, there's some men in tights in it, I suppose. But no,
Yeah.
the book is about Generation X,
Yeah.
right, which I'm a member of. And Generation X is sandwiched in between these gargantuan, media-hogging demographics, the baby boomers and the millennials, who are these strange kids coming up, many of whom you might actually see on this campus, so I don't
Yes.
want to hurt anyone's feelings. But there was a moment a couple of years ago where the boomers and the millennials seem to be sucking up all the mass media oxygen. We were hearing about the boomers turning 60, and they're still sexy and as successful as ever and ready to start their second acts. And the millennials, there was this kind of, to be Buddhist about it again, this kind of Us Weekly samsara of Brittany, Lindsay, Paris, Brittany, Lindsay, Paris, Brittany, Lindsay, Paris. And so there's this Gen X sensibility that seemed to have been lost in the shuffle. And I was interested to find out what had happened to us, my people. And so I wrote an essay for Details magazine where I work. It's one of those weird things where you write an essay very quickly. You don't know what kind of response you're going to get, and it happened to strike a chord in this case. We got
Did it get a
of
lot of response?
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
response, blog action. The Washington Post wrote a whole column about the essay. So
Right.
a variety of friends of mine, my editor and a couple of editors, thought there might be a book in it. But what's weird with the book is I did a 180. Like the essay itself was originally very defeatist and melancholy. I mean, it was meant to be a humor piece, but nevertheless, the thesis was, stick a fork in us, baby. We're done. Gen X, go home. We're crushed. But as I did research for the book, I came to a very different conclusion. The X Saves the World in the title, as any Gen Xer worth his salt would know, it's ironic. I don't really mean it. It's preposterous. It's meant to be sort of comic booky and superhero-ish. And yet, to have it both ways, I do sort of mean it. I mean, I feel like that Xers in various realms of American media and business and nonprofits and philanthropy are keeping American culture from sucking. And a lot of it has sucked pretty bad for the last 8 years. So somebody's got to do it, right?
Yeah, you filled it in. Actually, one of the things I loved about the book is you do sort of, start with where were we,
Yeah.
where are we now? But then you had all these, you do have at the end, you had this kind of, what is it, changing the world in a million little ways. Although, God forbid we say changing the world type thing.
Well, yeah,
But
first you got to just jettison the whole phrasing of change the world,
Yeah.
because that's associated with the Summer of Love and Woodstock and hippies and all that stuff that a lot of Xers feel internally failed. Like, we sort of came in the back, we sort of arrived in the backwash of that hippie dream and saw its flaws, shall we say. And but nevertheless, and we're also just kind of, we just think it's uncool to talk about changing the world, man.
Yeah.
So, but nevertheless, a variety of Xers are. And there are people like Cameron Sinclair from Architecture for Humanity, Majora Carter from Sustainable South Bronx, Scott Heiferman, who founded Meetup.com, Joshua Beckman, who you're going to meet soon, and Matthew Zapruder, who put together this poetry bus trip. I met people like this, I encountered things they were doing, and I felt that in a million little different ways, they were sending out a ripple effect of improvement in a country gone mad. So, Cameron Sinclair from Architecture for Humanity talked about this idea of urban acupuncture.
Yeah,
What that organization does is, if there's a disaster around the world, there's a Hurricane Katrina, the tsunami that hit Sri Lanka, or just extreme poverty, this organization can raise funds very quickly using just like handheld devices and mobilize architects to rush in and help rebuild neighborhoods very quickly. But now they can't rebuild a whole city. So what they will often do is rebuild a block, make sure it's as beautiful as possible. This is not about FEMA trailers. This is the ethos of Architecture for Humanity, is to build something really beautiful and sustainable and historically correct in one area and hope it radiates outward. So.
Well, you had all these great examples, all these great interviews and people you talked with in the book. And how would you describe, actually, I guess, in a way, in case anyone is not actually familiar with the three generations?
Yeah.
Like, how would you compare Gen X to the Boomers and the Millennials then?
Well, first of all, it's interesting to note that nobody even knows what Generation X is. When I did research for the book, I found that the experts all disagreed. And it tells us something, I think, about the invisibility of Gen X and their sort of strange marginalization on the main stage.
They can't even figure out what we are.
Yeah, they can't even figure out when we were born. So you'd see, like, they're born between 1964 and 1977. No, 1964 and 1980, 1960 and 1977. If you're born in the 60s and 70s, you probably have some X sensibility. I mean, Richard Linklater, the filmmaker who made the film Slacker, defining moment for Xers. Douglas Copeland, who wrote the original novel, A Generation X, Tales for an Accelerated Culture, both born in 1961. So you would think they define the sensibility, and it starts there. Interestingly, Barack Obama was born in 1961, so there's debate about whether or not he's an Xer. But I would say that each generation is sort of a reflex against the one before it. So if the Boomers were about mass and movements and this sort of utopian thinking, a lot of Xers are brined in a kind of reflex against that, a sarcasm, a detachment, a skepticism, maybe a distrust of the very idea of a collective, of a we. And the millennials coming up are a reflex against that. Like, they see, I think, Xers as these fuddy-duddy butterfly collectors who care about pristine vinyl copies of Sonic Youth albums and
albums, but the butterfly collectors, really?
No, I think they think of us as connoisseurs of arcana, and which I think is actually often true.
Yeah, I can see that. All right.
Joshua and I have had conversations along those lines this very day, actually. Joshua Beckman and I. I mean, I think I have an interest in things that are obscure and arcane, and millennials seem to be the opposite. They seem to be interested in being as mass and Disney and united as possible and positive, and they love advertising, and they love celebrities, and rah-rah. It's sort of like an army of mall rat cheerleaders, at least in my eyes. Now, I grant you, like, one thing I want to point out is the book is meant to be sort of hyperbolically humorous. It is. I'm transparently influenced by Tom Wolfe, and in the same way that he tried to do when he was successful with his work. I wanted to go a little over the top. So I concede that these are generalizations, but it's interesting when you talk about them, how they resonate with people.
Oh, they do. I mean, I was reading this book, and this was one of those, I couldn't put it down. I was, I live in the city, so I'm on the subway with it. And at one point, I literally, I was sitting here with my copy of the book, and I'm cracking up, I'm laughing out loud. And I see like two people across from me going like, trying to read the cover of the book. So I was like, here you go.
Thanks for your work. Thanks for your advertising.
Yeah, let's just walk around with it. But it is really funny. And I think it hits a lot of notes. I know as an Xer, I was like, oh God, yes, somebody finally said it. They said the truth has been spoken. Maybe they'll notice us now.
It's interesting you say that. I keep hearing this because a lot of Xers are resistant to the very idea of being a Gen Xer in the first place. So there is a bit of a hurdle in terms of convincing them to pick up the book. And yet I find when they do, that it serves as this kind of mutant form of self-help. It's like, yeah, I do belong, man. It's like I'm Joel Osteen all of a sudden, like rallying the masses. And people just, first of all, I just really wanted to entertain people, but people seem strangely kind of moved by it and by the idea that their generation has accomplished more than they thought.
Yeah.
I mean, from the technology standpoint, Google, Wikipedia, Craigslist, Amazon, Netflix, Yahoo, YouTube.
I didn't realize that was all
Gen X.
I didn't realize.
Created this world. We can have our debates about whether that's positive or negative. I happen to think, to a large part, it's positive, and a lot of alternative culture and ways of thinking are preserved on these sites. Lost in Translation, Being John Malkovich, Boogie Nights, Pulp Fiction, amazing films, amazing poetry, amazing rock and roll, hip hop. We've delivered, and so while still hoping, I hope that I don't rescind my Gen X membership because I was actually positive and tried to provide some uplift. I guess that's a lot. I'll stop talking that way. I sound too Tony Robbins.
No, well, we're moving towards Brick anyways, but it is a wonderful book, and I think the uplift is important because I mean, we're not saying we're going to save the world, but I think it's true how much these little individual movements are affecting some kind of change on a micro local level. So I think it's great.
Yeah, and that's the pragmatic way to look at it. And the other thing is, if we don't save the world, nobody else will at this point. Everybody else seems to have thrown in the towel.
Not Gen Y.
No, I mean, it's just going to be one big high school musical if they take over. So we have to
There'll be a lot of singing.
A lot of singing and a lot of dancing. A lot of choreographed dancing.
That's true.
Which terrifies me.
Which you talk about. Well, the book, again, is How Gen X Got Shafted. Got the shaft, but can still keep everything from sucking. And it's been a pleasure talking with you, Jeff Gordinier. And good luck with the book. I know it's doing wonderful.
Thanks, Suzanne.
And we'll take a break. We'll be right back.
My name is Luana Noemi Morales, and I live in Union Beach, New Jersey. I'm taking some classes in digital editing, and also I'm a media technician at Brookdale Community College. I actually think Brookdale is one of the best community colleges in the region, if not the country. It's really student-based learning, and I like that the classes are small. It's more personal between the students and the teachers. I'm really impressed with the fact that everything is geared towards learning and geared towards the student. I love to learn. I'm like a sponge, and anything you put in front of me, I will read and I will learn inside out, and education is very important in my family, and it's very important to me. I'm Luana Noemi Morales, and you are watching Brookdale TV.
Does peace really have a chance within our lifetime? At Rotary, we believe it does. We've created programs at universities around the world, dedicated solely to teaching peace to a new generation. There's a new symbol for peace. Rotary.
Hi, and welcome back to the Brookdale Visiting Writers Series show. I'm talking with Joshua Beckman, who is a poet. One of his recent books is Your Time Has Come, which is a gorgeous book. His most recent collection is called Shake, and he has authored five collections, 2 in collaboration, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So welcome to the second half of our show.
Thank you.
Second half of the show. You write in collaboration, you do translations, you write your own poems, you're the co-editor at Wave Books, correct? You organize this big book, your reading tour as well, and I'm just like, wow, you're the Renaissance man. You do everything. You know, do you do pottery too?
Right.
You know,
Everything
blow
having
glass.
to do with poetry.
It's a lot of different ways to approach poetry, actually. And I was wondering, does each thing feed into something else? How does that happen? So many people are so like, I wrote poems, leave me alone, don't talk to me till I'm done. You
And
know?
I love those people. And I really think about, I think I read a lot of those people who just focus on one thing and spend their time writing like that. And then I get excited and want to do what they do. And that's something different from what I'm doing, and then I'm reading someone else and I get excited and I move off. And so the translations, things like, for me, there's a really fluid movement from publishing to translating to writing to reading to thinking about poetry, about literature, and even about the world in general. I read, we were right outside the studios here, we were watching and listening in particular to a bird. And it was like, oh, right, I've been reading about birds and thinking about them,
And here one is.
and here one
Talking right at me.
is. And I published one of the new books that's coming out, has a thing about, birds. I don't know, things move pretty fluidly from one to the other for me.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I know that your new collection of poems, Shake, which is just wonderful. It's a book in 3 sections, and it has long poems in it. And I know that the reviews of the book have been wonderful. Your work has been compared to Ginsberg and Whitman and kind of these great, large visioned voices. But then this is the book right before it, right? They're like real short.
Right.
I was wondering about, how would you describe yourself as a poet, to ask that, terribly impossible to answer question, or maybe not.
Right. Oh, well.
What's your work like?
It's so funny. That's the hard question.
I know.
Well, what's your work like? Whereas describe oneself as a poet, I think the beginning of our conversation about moving through different things is probably how I think of myself as a poet.
Yeah.
And the work hopefully is changing for me. Although, in all honesty, when I wrote that book, the book with the short pieces, my first 2 books.
Your Time Has Come?
Your Time Has Come.
Yeah.
My first 2 books one of them had been 6 poems and one had been 5, so very long poems. And I thought, oh, well, this is totally different. And then I finished it, and I finished editing it, and I sat down and I thought, oh, this is sort of like one long poem. This is not different. And it's, so, each time I think there has to be, for me personally, I think for a lot of writers, the sense that you're moving away from what's happened, what you've done in the past. And for most writers, I also think that there's the inevitable realization that you don't get too far away
From
from what you've done in the past. And so each step feels a lot bigger when it's happening and a lot smaller when I'm looking at that book now, or looking at Shake even, which, while it's my newest book, is certainly not the newest poems.
It's not the newest poems.
Nope, written some since then.
Well done. When you look at, because you have 5 books out, when you kind of look at the trajectory of how those books came to be, do you see a change in your poetic concerns, or was it a conscious choice? I'm done with these really long poems. Darn it, I'm writing some 3-line poems.
Right.
No.
No. I mean, that wasn't really a conscious choice. That just happened, and that was. I mean, that book in particular is probably the most drastic break in terms of for readers to understand the break that's happened.
In your own writing.
In my writing.
I thought so, yeah. Although
they look so different. They're visually so different.
Yeah.
And the tone and the voice seems very different.
They seem like you can dip in and out of it. They seem like observations to a certain extent. You know, I mean, you can kind of, they do build throughout. You know, I can see that it's like, okay, well, this is sort of a long Joshua Beckman poem when you keep going. It's a really, really long one.
Right. I mean, yeah. Until it's
But it is a
done.
change. Did it feel good writing these?
Oh my God, that was the most pleasurable. Really, I had not written for a long time. I had been having a really hard time writing, and I think at that time the poems were getting incredibly convoluted and totally boring. Like just it's so I don't know what was happening, but like I was getting really overthinking, and then I wrote one of those, and I was like, oh, that's fun. Oh, I want to do that again, you know, and just started writing these poems, which felt like a very different direction from what were maybe a couple years worth of poems, none of which anyone has seen because they were terrible and I didn't show them to anyone. But, you know, so those breaks happen. I don't really think about from book to book because I think about my life and I'm like, oh yeah, that I recognize them in relation to my own life and in relation to like I lived on an island when I wrote that, and I lived on an island when I wrote Staten Island.
Oh, Staten Island.
I know,
that's so funny. I never think of it as an island.
You think of it more as an island if you have to take the ferry every day.
Oh, I would love to do that. I live on Manhattan. I don't think of that as an island either.
If you worked in Staten Island, you might.
I've just actually moved to Washington Heights. Well, I haven't moved to Washington Heights. I live in Washington Heights, but Washington Heights has the top of the hill where all the fancy people live, and then the bottom of the hill. And I'd spent a long time at the bottom of the hill. And we just bought an apartment, and it's like the Jefferson theme song. We're moving on up. We moved to the top of the hill, and from the top of the hill, it's the tip of Manhattan. There's water, so you actually see the water right there. Like it's only 2 blocks wide, and so all of a sudden, I've come to the realization that I actually live surrounded by water.
It's great.
Yeah,
it's a really fun. I mean. That to me is probably more available in that book than the aesthetic differences. You know, when I look back at that, if I'm giving a reading or I'm going through a bunch of books to do a reading across a number of books, I'll probably end up thinking more about, oh my God, I live, like now I live in Brooklyn again, and you know, which is fabulous. And
back to those gritty poems.
Yeah, exactly. I'm on the Gowanus Canal instead of, you know, the Bay. So.
Well, can you talk about Shake a little bit? Because it's still was it, you know, when you were done with this book, were you working on the poems in Shake at the same time? Did they start to overlap?
Not at the. They do overlap, but I didn't work on them at the same time. I started the poems in Shake. You know, there was about a 2-year period, as I said, during which maybe 5 pages of Shake were written, and a ton of the book. I don't know. Those poems didn't work out so well. And then this book happened, and then I continued writing what became Shake.
So you sort of picked up with it.
Yeah. It's like I had reached a sort of end point, and then these kind of appeared, and they were an entire book, and that's 150 of them or so. I think a few more, but I wrote hundreds and hundreds of them, and just really had a blast, and then started writing what became Shake again, and went on for a couple more years.
And can you talk about Shake a little bit? Just like what the primary, let me rephrase it as a question, like a better question. Like, were there some concerns, some choices of style or something that you wanted to tackle in this? You know, do you go in with, you know, I'm going to write urban poems now. I'm going to write the world has kicked me poem now. It's time for that poem.
I don't really go in with that. And I think that's why when I look back at them, it's harder to identify what's happening with the poems.
Yeah.
I'm writing all the time, or I'm trying to write all the time. I'm reading all the time, and I'm just always doing it. And what happens more often, and like in a book like Shake, is that a lot of what I wrote will fall away, and the only stuff that feels valuable or worthwhile to publish coheres in some way. So, for instance, the middle section of Shake, Let the People Die, just grew of its own, and that really, I mean, it's basically a sonnet cycle, and it wasn't even intended to be a sonnet cycle in the beginning of writing it, but it's after 9/11. I'm spending a lot of time on the ferry and in the ferry terminal, and everyone's freaked out, and the energy in those poems is really tough, harsh energy, like the opposite of this, of Your Time Has Come.
There's a shift. There's a definite shift.
Like a really heavy shift. And so that I see, I can sometimes recognize it's happening. I can certainly see it as I'm editing a book, but I'm not planning it before it starts to happen. And more likely than not, it's in the editing. There were a whole lot of like, you know, the funny poems weren't really working that year. You know, like, or whatever else I was writing wasn't really coming together.
I do love the humor in your work. I mean, you're a poet who definitely gives people permission to laugh. But you know, the karate chop of love and all these fabulous things. And what's the in children, or in heaven, the children will have umbrellas their size. Is that what it is? It's just this kind of offbeat, wonderful kind of observational humor, if there's kind of quirky humor. Do people tell you a lot about your work? Like, oh, you're a funny poet?
In particular when I give readings. And I think that's one of the things I enjoy. And there have been certain books, like my collaborative work with Matthew Rohr.
That's nice.
Those
hat,
were
thanks.
Nice Hat, Thanks. And Adventures While Preaching the Gospel of Beauty was a CD we did. And when we were on tour, we were having so much fun, and a lot of the poems were funny. You know?
That.
And I think that people come to a poetry reading expecting to be bored, even if they're really excited about coming to the poetry reading. And they're not expecting to laugh, even if they're thinking, oh, maybe I'll learn something, or maybe it'll be good for me, or you know, like whatever. But they're not expecting to laugh or have a fun time.
Because you're reading tonight at Brookdale with Jeff Gordinier, and so I'm very excited to be laughing this evening. So thank you for coming to talk to us. And this is Joshua Beckman, whose most recent book is called Shake, and earlier we talked to Jeff Gordinier, whose book is called X Saves the World. And that is it for the Visiting Writer Series today.